this is very inside baseball for our audience, but I hate writing titles. I hate finding titles.
Sometimes the title for me is okay. It's been sometimes the program notes.
Oh, well, that's always awful.
Yeah.
They're never not awful. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Everything Band, a podcast that features conversations with composers, conductors, and performers of music for winds and percussion. My name is Mark Connor. I'm a composer, and this is episode 16. My guest for this episode is Carol Brittin Chambers. Before we begin, I need to ask a favor. If you enjoy this podcast, would you please take a moment and go to iTunes and leave me a rating? This will help spread the word and bring the show to more listeners. I am honored and delighted that you are listening to my podcast. If you find value from the show and want to help me with hosting costs, I've just launched a Patreon page. Patreon is an online service that allows people to support creators in their work. You can find mine at patreon.com/Mark J. Connor. Now on to the episode. Hi, Carol.
Hi, Mark. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for joining me.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I feel really honored to be here.
Oh, well, the pleasure's mine. So, Carol, can you tell the listeners what you're doing right now?
Yes, sure. I live in San Antonio, Texas, where I'm pretty much a full-time composer and arranger now, since that's what I do most hours of the day and most months of the year. I do also teach at Texas Lutheran University, which is a university outside of San Antonio. I teach music ed classes there, such as orchestration, ear training, sight singing, music technology, things like that. Before that, I was a middle school and high school band director for about 7 years in the Northeast Independent School District in San Antonio. And I also still try to play. I'm a trumpet player. So I play with a group called the Mid-Texas Symphony, which is professional local musicians around down in South Texas. And also at the San Antonio Symphony, they'll call me occasionally to come sub or play extra. So I still try to play with them. And then I've got a beautiful family, an amazing husband, and 3 terrific children that are all now playing band instruments. Actually, they're all getting into those ages now, so they're playing as well.
Okay, can you tell me a little bit about your origin story, how you got into music?
Oh, sure. Well, I did come from a musical family, for sure. Both my parents were, well, my mom was not a professional musician, but both my parents were university professors. I grew up in Lubbock, Texas, and so the university there is Texas Tech University. And my dad he's a professional French horn player. He studied in New York and actually got to play with the New York Phil a few times. But he was the professor of French horn at Texas Tech University. And while my mom was not, music was not her career, she had also played in high school and college, and of course was a huge support of mine. Both my sister and brother were all-state French horn players. My sister now is a music ed research and professor out in California, University of the Pacific. And my brother didn't go into music as a career, but he was a drum major of our high school band and of our college band and everything like that. But so I grew up with music and practicing just all over our house all the time, going to, of course, rehearsals and concerts and things like that. I did start taking piano lessons at about the age of 6, I believe. And it was funny because not only did I have a little private lesson each week, our piano teacher, she also had us come to a separate theory class every week. So I started music theory when I was age 6, So I think that was a huge part. I was really serious with piano. I would go to like sonatina competitions and concerto competitions and things like that. I studied it for about 13 years really seriously. But middle school is when I began getting into band. And so I chose the trumpet, even though everybody else in my family pretty much was French horn. I did like horn a lot. In hindsight, I kind of think sometimes maybe I should have chosen that. And it's by far one of my favorite instruments to write for.
Mm-hmm.
But I can remember telling my parents, I think I'd like to play the melody a little bit more. And plus the trumpet's a little bit smaller. And it'll be much easier for me to carry. And anyway, they were like, okay, that's fine. You can play the trumpet. So anyway, I went on to be fortunate enough to make like the Texas All-State Band, Texas All-State Orchestra. So I got pretty serious about performing on that too. And when I decided to become a music major in college, going into college, it was hard for me there to decide which was going to be my major instrument. But I ultimately chose trumpet. I think part of just the social aspect, getting to play in ensembles. I couldn't necessarily picture myself, while I was going to be in the practice room with my trumpet a lot, I couldn't necessarily just picture myself being alone so much, I guess, with piano, or at least that's the way I felt. And plus, I knew I wanted to do my undergrad in music education. I was very interested in teaching as well as performing. So, that was more the band route, instrumental, ensemble type instruments, things like that. And then after that, went on to grad school to Northwestern up in Chicago. And that's where I pursued my trumpet performance. I wanted to study with the Chicago symphony players and things like that.
Okay, so now listening to that story, I have two questions. One is about the piano. How did you find that your piano skills helped you as a music educator once you were a band director?
Oh yeah, I've never had that question before.
Well, I see a lot of students come through and they just try to get through class piano. They just do the least they can do to get through. And I want to present that opposite story.
Sure. Well, I mean, I didn't know it at the time, but piano, I can see now the fact that I became pretty good at it, and could really play, because I did learn all the classic, Bach inventions and sonatinas and all those kinds of things and sonatas. And so you have to get kind of some chops to be able to play that. And I don't necessarily have all those chops anymore. But I think even along with just playing, being able to play the theory that I mentioned early on, which I know a lot of people don't have that with their background probably that early, but because when that light bulb went off for me, I tell my ear training students this all the time. I was in fourth grade, I remember, and the intervals, because we'd been drilling intervals, and all of a sudden, I remember one day when my piano teacher she played this melody, and I could just picture what those intervals were. Oh, she just went up a fourth, now she went down a minor third, now she went up a perfect fifth. And I was like, oh, that's what melodic dictation is. It's just these string of intervals. And I hadn't had solfege or anything like that. I wasn't as vocally trained. It was all piano and aural like that with the intervals. But from that point on, I could just really play anything that I could hear. And so I know with writing, for sure, that's helped me because I can, I don't even have to necessarily know, oh, that's a 5 up a 2 or, or whatever. I just can just play, and I know these natural progressions and what's going to sound good. And especially when I get into marching band arranging, then you can just alter something a little bit. And, so I think that skill of playing and then just the dictation and all that has helped me so much there. But with music education, it was nice when teaching. Well, again, the same thing as I tell my ear training students, when you're directing band, let's say it's your middle school band, you have to be able to tell if your French horns, for example, are playing the right pitches. You know how easy it is for them to be on the wrong pitches. And so you have to be able to hear it ahead of time, what it's going to be. And of course, any conductor needs to know what it's going to sound like before everybody starts playing in your rehearsal. But especially with younger kids, because they just really don't know sometimes. And so I think all of that just helped with my aural skills so much. I could just hear, I could sing, I could immediately look at a score and sing people's parts, the third trumpet part, could sing that to them. So that's would be the hugest benefit that I found with teaching. But also if I wanted to go over to piano and play something for them, that would help, so.
It's interesting. There's a connection here to another podcast. I listened to a podcast called Amused, which is 4 teachers in California and Oregon who are in their first couple of years of teaching. Mm-hmm. And I think their common connection is the University of Pacific.
Oh, how interesting.
But they were talking about the choir teacher in that podcast was talking about how there's a music Olympics where there's a competition for music skills as opposed to pieces. You brought up the oral skills issue, and this is on my mind since listening to them, is the idea of teaching skills. And how do we do that within the context of the pieces that we're teaching or within the context of the way the system's set up now?
Sure. Again, I'm from Texas, and I've taught in Texas. And so, I would say a lot of the band programs in particular in Texas and the directors are, I would say they're kind of known for trying to create a system in their rehearsals where they really do work on it. We tend to call it fundamentals here. We do work on a lot of fundamentals. And so they'll do things like, for example, a Remington exercise, but a lot of teachers where they are having the kids sing and try to hear this, and and then using the harmony director and things like that to really work on chords and tuning and skills. And of course, here a big thing is just really good tone production. So they'll spend a fair amount of rehearsal working on those fundamentals, and then the idea is then when you pass out the music, you apply those same fundamentals. And of course, some teachers are better at doing that, like making that connection. But that's a big thing here, is really trying to teach good fundamentals and skills, and then it transfers when you pass out a piece. And then it shouldn't be so hard for the students to read that piece correctly the first time even.
Right. And Texas, of course, the ensembles are legendary for the pieces that they play.
Sure.
That's interesting because there's a culture of that in Texas that doesn't exist in some other parts of the country.
I think there is. Mm-hmm.
Do you think, are most schools, even at the middle school level, multi-director?
It depends on the size of the district, the size of the school. But yes, we are very blessed that oftentimes there's more than one director. Sometimes there'll be 3. Sometimes at the high school there'll be 4, although that's not everywhere. And often maybe one of those directors is really the percussion specialist, for example. But yeah, it's really nice, especially if you're getting up to programs with more than 300 students in them, then sometimes, there will be 3 directors. And certainly even at the middle schools, there are usually 2. And again, this may be more the larger districts. It's not everywhere.
Oh, sure. But the point I was trying to make is that when I was a first-year teacher, I had always grown up in schools with only one director.
Yes.
And so when I got a job as a teacher in California, I was the only person.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was a first-year teacher, and I had very little mentorship, and it took me quite a while to kind of work things out. And I'm wondering if the system in Texas with the resources to have more than one director really helps sort of perpetuate that culture.
Oh, I think it can. I mean, if you're lucky enough first teacher to get with someone who is a good mentor, and that happens all the time. But you can just learn so much just by being there every day with someone else who is more experienced, and if they're willing to then split things with you. So I know when I taught at high school, there were 3 of us, actually 4 of us at this high school. And, every day we would split every group. We would take the top band, and it wasn't necessarily my group because I wasn't the head director, but I would still take the brass out. And the woodwind specialist, one of our other directors, he would take the woodwinds, and then maybe the other one would take percussion. So a lot of times we could just work in smaller groups and everything, and then maybe a couple of days later we would put them all together and do full ensemble. So there were just so many things, that I could work with the brass, and the woodwind person could work with the woodwinds, and the kids didn't have to sit there and have their time not wasted, but they could use their time very efficiently on what mattered for their instrument.
You're a composer now, almost full-time, as you mentioned earlier. So can you talk to me about how you made the move from high school teacher, middle school teacher to composer?
Sure. Yep. So I was teaching and, full-time, and also my husband was a full-time at a high-powered high school. He was the head director at a high-powered program here in San Antonio, Ronald Reagan High School. And I was at the theater middle school. And I really liked being a band director. We were both realizing at some point how busy this was. And it was about that time we were trying to start our own family and things like that. So I was starting to kind of think, I wonder if there might be some other opportunities where we both don't have to do this kind of schedule all the time. But while we were at those programs, that's when I started doing my first really marching band arranging. And that's really how I got into composing and all this more. I did do a little composition stuff when I was little, but then as I got into music ed and music performance, that kind of got put on the back burner. I didn't think about it as much anymore. But when we were teaching, and quite honestly, we weren't getting some of our marching music on time. And so I just started telling my husband, Mark, I can write that. everything. And so then I started enjoying it, and then we started doing well at competitions, and I was writing some things with another friend of mine, another one of our directors. And so we did some tag team things together, but ultimately I just started writing more, and I really enjoyed it. And then people from other schools started contacting at some point saying, hey, can we get some of those arrangements? And I'm like, oh yeah, sure. We just get the licensing, and or I can do it. People started asking me then to write new things for their school, for their schools, their marching bands and all of that. And so anyway, about that time, then I got offered the position to teach a lot of music ed classes, including like brass methods class and things like that at Texas Lutheran University. And so I went ahead and made that move, even though it was going to be, a pay cut and that kind of thing. But I'm so glad I did that because it allowed me to alter my schedule a little bit, where it wasn't quite the same kind of busyness and stress level. And then I had a little bit more energy, actually, and a little more time to start writing more. And some of the opportunities there, like one of my first concert band commissions was actually TLU. They asked me to write Beautiful River for one of our professors that was tragically killed in a car accident. So that's one of the first commissions I got to write. And then that went on to get on like the state list and things like that. So that's when I started to realize, oh, I could do this. And now I actually have a little more time to do this. And then at some point, the schedule started to shift, and I started getting enough demand, especially for marching band, but then also putting out concert band pieces, that I started to do that more and more. And then I even reduced a little bit the college teaching a little bit more so I could fit my schedule. So that's kind of how that transitioned.
So now I know the answer to this, but how did you figure out how to write?
Again, I think a lot of it went back to just my early, as soon as I figured out dictation, and, I could just do that. But of course, there's this whole element, you can't just slop anything down, even though you can hear something by ear. Yes, you have to write things with respect to ranges and good scoring, right? That's what we try to teach our students. And so I really think being a band director helped me understand that because, I had to teach beginners even. So when I write my young band music now, which I love doing that, I totally have an understanding of what that age group is capable of on their instruments. And there's a reason why, sometimes with the publishers, they even want you to follow certain guidelines. Well, I know that because I had to live with those sixth graders and teach them. As a trumpet player, I think I am pretty sensitive, and this goes into the marching band arranging too, with what high school trumpet players are really capable of, and where's their sweet spot where they're going to have, in terms of range, where they're not going to get too tired, but where it still has volume and impact and things like that, reaching up to the press box. And so I just think with experience with being a band director helped me do that a lot. Again, with the marching band, since I got to do it for our groups that we were teaching, I got to experiment a little bit in those early years. And so I would write some things, and sometimes we would try it. And again, kind of that same example, it might be, why doesn't that chord right there have enough impact? And so I figured out really fast it had to do with where your first trumpet, where your first horn, where your first trombone are on their ranges. And things like, and this was some advice from some other arrangers too, but, making sure your low brass aren't too thickly scored and they're not too close together, with that vertical spacing. So opening up that harmonic spacing, and really just marching band arranging, those arrangements can be a little more simple. You don't need quite as many complex parts with the winds all the time.
Yeah, I asked that question because I feel like there's a lot of directors out there who maybe want to try this, but maybe they're nervous or they don't think they can.
Sure. The great thing when you're teaching is you have little experimental groups right there. And no, I mean, really, even if you just try writing something for brass only, and so you spend 5 minutes of rehearsal, hey guys, I'm going to pass this out to you, and you can kind of see some things or some woodwinds. And if you have an all-state clarinet player, you can ask her or him, what do you think of it? Like, what's hard about this? Or, they can often tell you what's ridiculous. I know with my college students that I'm trying to teach, when we're teaching orchestration, of course, one of the number one mistakes is just trying to write the brass too high all the time, And so, as one of my colleagues said it so great, I thought, was, just because you can play that note at times doesn't mean you should all the time, so things like that. But when you get out teaching, you really, you live it every day and you really realize what they're capable of.
I also tell people there's a huge resource right on your podium, the scores of the pieces you're playing.
Oh, of course. Yes. And that's the other thing, arranging a lot of these things. I mean, for most of my marching band arrangements, I don't use a score most of the time because I'll take motifs. You only have so much time because usually we have about an 8-minute time limit for a show. But so really it's kind of like the best of. I'll just take some motifs. Hey, for Dvorak New World Symphony, what are some of the most famous quotes? And then I'll kind of just go on a tangent and make my own thing with it. But there are times, though, where some directors they're like, hey, when we play this part of Lincolnshire, for example, we want to actually do this real part right here. And so sometimes I'll look at a score for that. Of course, I still need to score the low brass a little differently, not so thickly. But you're right. You can learn. Oh, I've learned so much from some of these, just studying some of these scores. And, oh, how did they get that sound there? And I just love that. So I've learned a lot just digging in and looking at what other composers did, for sure.
What's it like to get a marching commission? What does that look like when someone approaches you?
Well, it can look like different things. They're not all done the same way, although there are general things that are the same, I suppose. So basically, it's gotten now where directors contact me. Well, if new directors that I haven't written for yet, if they're trying to kind of get on the list, they'll start contacting me in September or October of the year before that next fall. And then I've got schools that I've written for a number of years. And so if they want to stay on, I'll keep them. So I may not have an open slot, but in any case, that's when people kind of start asking. And so the directors that I've already committed to, and we know we're going to do this, a lot of times they'll start getting me their ideas in December of the year before or January. A lot of us meet. We have our state convention in San Antonio here for Texas, TMEA. We have that convention in early February. So that for me is a very busy time because I'll go to the convention and just meet all day long with different directors. And we start talking about their show for this next year. And so then I have all spring and the summer. So that's my really busy time where I'm just writing nonstop. And I don't write one show all the way through for one school. Usually shows are about 4 movements or so. And so usually I'll write like someone's part 1 and then somebody else's part 1. And that way I can be getting them their first parts and then their percussion arranger, because there's a different percussion arranger usually who does all the battery and all the pit and electronics and all that kind of stuff that are in marching shows now. So if I get them something, then they can go ahead and start going. And then the third person in line would be the drill writer. So that's why I kind of split mine up like that and just kind of go movement by movement. But basically, yeah, we meet, and some directors have a really clear idea of what their show concept is going to be and what music they want to use. Some have, and sometimes it'll be just the head director. Sometimes it'll be the director and the assistants, and maybe they have a visual designer that's helping them. Maybe it's the person that does their drill, or maybe it's their color guard instructor that also is going to design all their costumes and flags. So it just depends on the team, whichever team we're talking about. But anyway, the team and I will meet and discuss. And so sometimes they'll have a good idea of a general concept they want to do, but they're not sure yet what source material. So I might give them some ideas. Again, some teams already kind of have a lot of that figured out. But I love it because it's so creative, for me anyway, because the trend for a while has been taking some really well-known literature, like we may be doing some Hindemith and Samuel Barber, but we're going to mix some Coldplay in there, Mm-hmm. And so I love that because that to me gives it a really modern element. And I try not to make composers turn over in their graves too much, but I do like being able to take things and then kind of do a twist here or there. And then the whole thing with these competitive marching shows now, there's so much visual. And really the best shows are those where the visual and the music match each other. So one of my band director friends usually says, does the movie match the soundtrack? You know?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I listen to another podcast. I listen to a lot of podcasts.
Uh-huh.
This one's called The Portfolio Composer by Garrett Hope. And he interviewed a Hollywood composer, and I can't remember the composer he interviewed, but he talked about the Hollywood music, and does it help? What did he try to say? How did he put it? He said something like, does it illuminate the story, or does it help tell the story?
Yes.
And it's interesting how that's changed in marching over the years, how we've gotten to such a visual art instead of just the music.
Yes, absolutely. And, there are certain contests and festivals that you go to where that's part of the criteria on the judges' sheets. And so, again, that's important, too. It depends on what kinds of contests you're going to, because some are more about just execution and whatever you put out there. You could be standing still half the time. But when you march, are you doing it well? And then whatever you play, are you playing it well? But there's some contests where there's much more design in there, because they will have their execution scores, like individual music and ensemble music and individual marching and ensemble marching. But then there's also some other criteria called general effect. And sometimes that's general effect of the music, general effect of the visual, and how do those tie together. And so like the example I use is, you may be on part of the show where you're playing more technical type stuff. It's fast. The kids are marching at 172, and you're featuring little brass technique right here, and then the woodwinds do a little frilly answer type thing, and or a little ensemble comes up to the microphones, and you're featuring them. These are some of your all-state, maybe two bassoons and an oboe or something, or a sax quartet or whatever. There's just the sky's the limit as to what you can do. But maybe at that moment, some of the visual elements are, again, faster marching, and maybe your guard is spinning rifles or doing sabers or something like that. But then you might get to this slower moment that's beautiful, and you do this modulation of these chords, and then everybody turns around, and you have what we call this huge arrival or impact. And the sound is huge, and that's perhaps when you want to see these huge flags just go up. So that's what I mean, like the visual and the music matching each other. And so you can get really rewarded when all that is designed well. And basically it's, are you taking the viewers and the listeners on this emotional journey? So throughout this 8-minute show, or some places the shows can be a little bit longer. In Texas, we have an 8-minute limit at our state festival, at our state contest. But basically, are you taking the listeners and the viewers on this emotional journey through your show? Are there highs and lows and different emotions and things like that?
How do you learn about this? How do you get involved?
Well, again, I was teaching it and living it, so that's kind of how I learned a lot about that. But if you live in Texas, and if you have children that get into marching band, you're going to go to your fair share of contests and festivals and things like that. But not just Texas. I mean, lots of states, of course, do a lot of this too. But, you can watch videos, of course, of like Bands of America is a really good one, where you see lots of creative, really creative visual and, and music that's incorporated. And then, of course, again, if you get hold of some of those judges' sheets so you know what's expected, that helps you a little. I know for me, when I first started writing marching shows, I would get so into, let's say, like the slow part of it, the ballad, and it's like, oh, this is so beautiful. I'm so glad we're doing this, Barber or whatever it is. And it would just go on and on forever. And then I realized I had written like 2 minutes too long.
Yeah.
So I have gotten a lot better because I'm on a schedule about, hey, pretty much we might have this introduction that's like 30 seconds long. And then, like, hey, welcome to our show. It's a big, loud moment. And then we go into something fast. So you want the variety of tempos and things like that. But it needs to last about 2 minutes. So, of course, with our great computer programs now, like Finale and everything, you can sort of plan that out ahead of time so you know how many measures you have here. And then, again, it's really just not letting one idea go on for too long. And then I have communication, again, with my directors about, hey, who are your outstanding players? Who do we really want to feature this year? And that's where it's like, oh, we have an all-state bassoon. We have this sax quartet. So you do those elements. But for me, it's about variety And then having one event kind of, again, with the tempos and all that, but also harmonically leading to the next event and just sounding natural and sounding good. But again, with marching band, you can put in some of those different kinds of altered chords, like a tritone here or things like that that give it a little angst. And that's the other thing, like what kind of emotion at this moment in the show are we wanting? Do we want something darker here? Do we want something angrier? Is the end of the show, is that where we want to hear something more uplifting? And then one of my favorite things is to bring back some melody. Maybe it's a melody we used in the ballad, but then I bring that back at the end of the show. And now, even though our feet are moving fast, I still take that melody as kind of our yay, our ending here. And their feet are moving fast, but I just put it over different chords. So again, it's just, to me, it's so creative. It's almost like making new compositions, but using some of these just really famous melodies and stuff.
Do you write the percussion at all? What do you give your percussion score?
I always laugh when I talk to the percussion arrangers, and I tell them not to make fun of me, because for concert band, of course, I write my own percussion and that. But with marching, that is, again, that's just a different animal. It's, a lot of the marching bands have this large battery, and then huge pit, what we call the pit or the front ensemble. And now it's all the mallets and auxiliary instruments, but also their electronics involved. So for mine, I really don't think I have that skill set. I was never a percussionist. I never played, snare drum out on a marching field by any means. But also I don't even have time to do that. So it's enough for me to get the wind arrangement. But what I do is I will add my own battery parts that I don't let people see, but I let them hear it, because I can write enough and it gives the kind of effect, because adding some of that and adding cymbals and things like that, it does, when the directors are listening to my MIDI, like the draft that I send them, I think it gives them much more idea of the intent that I have right there. Hey, this is a big swell and it's leading in, or here you hear some snare, with these that are complementing these technical trumpets. So I'll write something. It's not what you're really going to pass out to the battery players by any means.
Yeah, sure.
And then basic mallet lines and then synth. And hey, I basically want some kind of choir sound right here, or some kind of strings. And it gives the battery and pit writers kind of a guide to follow, so they can tell what my intent was in writing it. And the directors can hear, oh, okay, I hear the energy here and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's almost like a Hollywood score where you're handing it out to your arrangers.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So mine, I'm particular. Yes, the brass and woodwinds need to play what I wrote, but the other stuff, you guys.
Well, I agree with you. The marching percussion is such a specialty.
Yes.
It's very daunting to me to look at that.
Yes. Yeah. And then, it's so funny because a lot of the percussion arrangers will then send me their score. And they're like, hey, Carol, what do you think? I mean, they don't always. And I tell them, you don't have to. It's fine. I just want the director to be happy with what you wrote. Can
I ask you a business question about that?
Sure.
How do the royalties get divided? Is there a percentage for the percussion writers?
Because now I've worked with lots of percussion arrangers, just tons and tons, and so many of them are just so good. And but for all the different schools, a lot of them will have their own percussion arranger, and then some don't. And so then I have some that I can recommend. So I just tell the directors, I let the percussion arrangers handle their own side of it. So that's just a separate thing. So they can use someone I recommend, but I let them talk to each other and negotiate with each other.
Oh, I see. So is it a flat fee for the arrangement?
For the wind arrangement, yeah. And then I let percussion, all the arrangers just they negotiate their own deals. They can charge what they want. A lot of times, it seems like these days, a lot of them will charge about half of what the wind book costs, maybe.
Uh-huh.
They're not all that way, and of course, some are more well-known than others. But I just let the directors, they just figure that out. And a lot of them, like I said, have their own percussion arranger on staff anyway. And so maybe they're the ones writing the book.
So are most shows original? Is there much resale of shows?
Yes, there is now. But of course, you have to get the copyright license and all of that.
Yeah.
So I make that really clear. Like when I'm advertising that, if I have a show that doesn't require any licensing, I'll put that on there, because that is an added cost, But I will do all the licensing requests for my clients, for my directors, because I know when we were directors, that was such a pain dealing with that. So I just, once we decide what we're doing, then I go ahead and put the requests in to the publishers. Or now, sometimes there's some licensing exchange companies you can use, and some of them are fast. Yeah, so that's how that works.
Yeah, so let's move to my comfort zone. We'll talk about concert band music. That's how I first discovered you.
Yeah.
What piece? I just listened to a piece of yours the other day that I really like, Sun Chaser.
Yes.
So do you want to talk about sort of the concert band? Did you start writing concert band music or marching band first?
I started writing marching band first. And then it was just probably a couple years later, then I started writing some concert band piece. And like that one I mentioned, Beautiful River, was probably my first main one that I wrote. Yeah. And then after a little bit, once I got one like on the list, and then I reached out to Larry Clark at Carl Fisher, and he started publishing my stuff. So now most of my, especially young band music, grade 1, grade 2, things like that, I'll let Carl Fisher publish it, because at first I kind of wanted just to do it all myself, and then I realized the time involved in trying to print everything and make it look good. And then I realized just their marketing, they're known nationwide and internationally, they sell things overseas for me. And so just that and getting on J.W. Pepper, to me, it was worth it.
So I want to talk about this because I'm actually have your catalog up on the internet right now, and I'm looking at it. And so you do have a few self-published pieces. You want to tell me about what that was like and why you sort of moved to Carl Fisher?
Yes. So, again, when I started writing, I had already created my company, Aspenwood Music, and so I could put it up there. And I do have a lot of band director friends that will play things. They're like, "Oh, I see you have this out. I have a region band. I'd like to play that," and so on. But then once I started, like I said, once I started moving a lot of it to Carl Fisher, that just, for me, it made the marketing a lot easier, and they're so well known. So a lot of times when I have something up that's mine, it hasn't gone to Carl Fisher yet. So Sun Chaser, actually, you mentioned that one. That was written last spring, but now it has gone into publication. It just hasn't, I don't think it's on the shelves yet. So that one will be Carl Fisher. And Night Fury is one that was commissioned this last fall. And same thing, it's about to come out in print with Carl Fisher.
I do the same thing with my music. I put it up as my own publishing, and then if it gets published, and then I have some that I'm actually holding back. I just don't really want them to be published.
Sure.
So what's your process for writing a new work for concert band? How does that start?
Okay. Well, for me, it depends on if it's a commission or not, for sure. Because definitely if it's a commission and if it's, to celebrate someone's life, like I just did another one a few weeks ago, and sadly it was an assistant principal who had passed away. He lost his battle with cancer, and so they wanted to have a special memorial for him and commission a piece. So then for sure I talked to the director. We have a lot of discussion about what they want this piece to be like, the character of it. Do they want something slow and beautiful? Do they want something more lively? And then we'll kind of find some inspiration. With this particular one, I had been inspired actually by this Maya Angelou video, and she referenced this African-American spiritual from the 1800s, God Put a Rainbow in the Clouds. I don't know if you've ever heard that. And I hadn't, but then I went and looked it up, and I was like, oh, this is this little song, and it has the most beautiful words. Basically, when it looks like the sun won't shine anymore, God put a rainbow in the clouds. So this last piece I wrote, we named it Rainbow in the Clouds, and it was for this person. So that's the first process, is just, what do you want this to be like? And then, of course, things like the timeline. When is this concert going to be? And things like that. And for me, my best time for writing concert music is like September and October and November, because the whole rest of the year is really marching band crazy, just trying to get all of those done. So finding out when it's going to be, and then that's kind of how we go from there. And then I usually write a draft and things like that. And then if I I hope that all of them usually get published by Carl Fisher, but whether it is or not, a lot of times depending on the grade level. So I think about it, is this going to be like a contest style piece? And then what grade level are we looking at? And so then I have, of course, some stipulations. Okay, if it's going to be grade 1, then there's going to be one clarinet part, one trumpet part, when you get into grade 2 and then things like that. So then I think about, okay, then so then I have to really think about what kind of melodies could I do if I put it in such and such a key where the clarinet won't be crossing back and forth over the break, or, staying within the range limitations and things like that.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. All those things that matter. What's the biggest challenge for you for writing for the youngest grade levels?
Oh, gosh. That's one of my favorite things to write. And at the same time, like you just mentioned, it can be a challenge. For me, it's within those limitations of what they can do, trying to be creative and trying to write something that is just somehow a little bit different than the other grade ones that are out there. So sometimes for me, if I think of a style that I want to write, like a couple of years ago when I wrote Danza de España, that was like, okay, I'm going to just do this. And what would that sound like? And so that allowed me to put it into a little bit different meter, 3/4, whatever. I know these days now, trying, even for those younger grades, trying to incorporate some interesting percussion, that helps a lot. Because the wind players have certain range limitations, the percussion, of course, can do a lot more rhythmically and things like that. Use some more instruments, Oftentimes here we'll have 7 or 8 percussionists standing back there. They need something to do. But that's the biggest challenge for me, I think, is just trying to be a little bit different and creative, but still stick within those limitations.
Yeah, I love writing for that grade level too. I love those grade 1 and 2.
Yes, it's so fun.
It is fun. And their experience is so much more visceral.
Yes.
At that age. They get so excited about it.
They really do. And I mean, if you give them something, that's the other thing is I try to do sometimes, at least with the faster pieces, is to where it seems harder than it is. So you just know that in the band hall, even if it has a cool title, when their director says, "Hey, pull out so-and-so," if the kids are like, "Yeah," that to me is a success, where they think it plays it really hard, and it's just eighth notes, but
There was a local junior high band camp last summer that did my grade half, my beginning band piece for the lowest ensemble. And this little clarinetist, couldn't have 3 foot nothing, comes running up. "I loved your piece." That makes it so much fun.
Oh, that is great.
So do you have any general advice you'd give to young composers who are just starting out in the band world, either marching or concert?
Sure. Yeah, I think the best advice I could give is, well, a couple of things. First of all, save everything, on your backup hard drive, because you just never, you don't want to lose it. And you also just don't know, a year from now, this little portion of something that you wrote might really fit something else, or could, or maybe you kind of put it on the back burner, but then later you're like, oh, you get this new flash of inspiration. So just save everything, and then later, as you learn more, you might be able to go back and, I can make this better, things like that. And the other piece of advice is just try to hear your stuff played. So, if you're a college student, even if it's a little studio class or something where everybody's learning secondary instruments, they could play grade 1 stuff. That would be perfect for them. You could try out things, and you could see how well it works for them, for those instruments. And then harder things, certainly your ensemble director, there are times of the year where they would have some more time to read some things, even with the more advanced groups. And if you're out teaching, like we already mentioned, you've got some ensembles right there that you could just listen, because it's definitely nice to hear your stuff played by real humans. Every time I go do a clinic or something, I always tell the kids that, it's so nice to hear it played by real live people instead of just on my computer. And then you get a more realistic sense of how it really sounds.
Yeah, I mean, that's really solid advice, both of those. Okay, so this is my favorite question. What advice would you give to your 20-year-old self?
That is a good question. I think the advice I would give is just don't be afraid to take a little risk at certain times. Explore those unique opportunities that present themselves, because you just never know where your path may lead. You know, so you may have skills in this area and you may have trained in this area, but sometimes just one door opens that you didn't even know was going to be there. And it can lead to just such interesting things in your life.
Yeah, so true. Okay, so what's your favorite work for wind ensemble and why?
For wind ensemble, it would probably have to be Lincolnshire Posy by Granger. And really, it was hard. You know, it's hard to think about just one because there's so many great ones. And I love different ones for different reasons. You know, certain things like Hindemith, I didn't even appreciate till later. And now when I look at things that he did and so on, but just forever, Lincolnshire, one reason is when I first made the Texas All-State Band, that's the main piece that we played. And that was the first time I'd ever been around musicians of that caliber. And it just so came to life. And of course, the clinician was amazing. But that was one of the first times when I really started not just paying attention to my little trumpet part, but listening across the band to the variety of colors. And now I've arranged it for even marching and things like that. And so when I study that score and I really just look at just all the little attitudes with his little melodies and the different personalities throughout all those movements, but the colors too, the different timbres. You know, when I just, even in that first movement, Lisbon, the sailor song, and just what the woodwinds are doing, I can just remember sitting in that all-state band and being kind of right behind the saxes probably and the low reeds, and just hearing that. And I was like, really? They can do that? And it was just kind of eye-opening for me. So Lincolnshire is definitely my most favorite band piece for sure.
Yeah, we can't go wrong with that one. So now you mentioned that you had an orchestra piece that you wanted to share.
Oh, sure. So, yeah, even before I got into playing trumpet and all that, but, you know, I told you my father was a professional horn player and all this, but the most probably influential piece was Appalachian Spring for me by Copeland. And it's funny when I think about why, and again, all the pieces of your life that fit together. But when I was young, we got a cabin over in the mountains, what we were talking about earlier. And we would go up there, and we didn't even have a phone, and we certainly didn't have a TV or anything. And we'd go up there, and my dad would be practicing and stuff. But we did have this record player, and we had these records, certain collection. They're still there. And one that he would just always put on was Appalachian Spring. And that was another one. I mean, I was young, but just sitting there and just those opening, you know, the way Copeland just takes a little quote that's like 3 or 4 notes. That's it. And it starts with one timbre. And then that kind of fades away. And then like this oboe grows out of it or some other color. And I would just go into another world. I would just be mesmerized listening to how he did this. And then, of course, with the strings. I don't write for strings, but, you know, very often. But I just have this love for that string sound. And anyway, Appalachian Spring, and it goes, that was just always such an enjoyable place for me, being up in the mountains. And in fact, it's right by this little lake called Aspen Lake. And you can see where that is the inspiration for my whole company, actually, Aspen Wood Music. It's all about that place and time. And I just think, Appalachian Spring for me was the beginning of it all, probably.
Yeah, now I want to go listen to that piece. I wore my recording out when I was in college.
Yeah.
I had one spring, I don't know if it was my junior or senior year. I must have listened to it 3-4 times a day. It's a beautiful piece. Okay, anyway. So this just came to me while you were talking, and I didn't prepare you for this question, but which of your pieces, if someone hasn't heard your music before, which piece would you want them to hear first?
Oh, gosh. That's a hard question, Mark.
I know, and I'm sorry to spring it on you, but it just seems like such a good one.
Wow. Just one. Well, part of me wants to say Rusty Bucket, because that's one of my more recent ones, and it's a little harder, and I just love it for so many reasons. And you definitely will hear a little bit of Granger influence in there and things like that. Mm-hmm. And part of me wants to say Cedar Canyon Sketches, because that's one of the first commissions I did that was like a contest style piece. And in that one, you would probably hear some of the John Williams influence with some of my friends. Mm-hmm. But probably what I would say for the number one would be Beautiful River. That's the first grade 3 that I was commissioned to write. And I just, that was one of my earlier ones, but I really am proud of how some of that came out with some of how the woodwinds are at the beginning and then how it changes and modulates and goes again into kind of these different chords and stuff at the end. So yeah, I think Beautiful River would probably be my top.
So is there anything coming up that you'd like to share or promote?
The next thing probably coming up would be I have a new commission that'll be coming out in the fall, and that's actually for a group in California. It's the Valley Concert Band, and so they just commissioned me to write something. One of the beloved musicians that I think was in that band, the director of that band, and just in that community, he passed away last year, and so they're doing kind of a celebration concert for him this fall. So that'll be coming out soon.
Okay. Where is the Valley Concert Band? Do you know?
Stockton.
In Stockton. Okay. How can people get in touch with you?
Well, I've got my website, which is aspenwoodmusic.com, and there's a contact page on there. Or you can just email me directly, carol@aspenwoodmusic.com. And I certainly don't mind if people reach out to me on Facebook either.
All right, Carol, thank you so much for the interview.
Thank you so much, and just thanks for this opportunity.